my side, and I can send that to you.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, because it's usually my wife handling this thing, but now it's recording here,
Excellent.
and then I'll send it to you.
I might be able to record it from this end and have you
I think
record.
so.
Yeah. Oh, please ask. Oh, well, you have to give me the permission to record, I
Yeah, and now
guess.
she
Yeah.
left. I don't know how.
Okay, that's fine. Well, let's just get started.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Well, and I usually do the introductions on these things later.
yeah.
And so I'll just, jump right into it. I had a sense when I was reading the book, it's almost like uh, there's so much going on between the lines with Anton, and your writing kind of was pointing at it, but it's almost like all the action was happening off screen. The
Mhm.
magician was focusing your attention. You were focusing attention in one area, but I think
Yeah.
there was sort of a big area that was going on behind the scenes, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think that was the main premise of this entire project. It started out as a documentary film, uh,
Correct, correct.
it just came from this notion I had that I loved those days. He was a great guy. We had a good time, and there's also always the risk. You're as you grow older, you become nostalgic, right? And you think of things in a nice shimmering light. In this case, a very dark light, but still. And but I had this thing, that something had been going on more than met the eye in a way, more than just cool meetings, and that I was felt so privileged in a way to have this opportunity to be there. And the I perceived, and the more I thought about it, the more I found out that it was true, that he had sort of given out little morsels. You call it between the lines, or just in non-verbal ways, in a way. And for me, very much it had to do with certain kinds of movies, because of course that's what friends do. They connect to a certain kind of resonance, whether it's music or movies or literature. And that was really his thing, because he was so well read and loved music and watched so many great films. And specifically for me, I felt after the fact, much later, that he had specifically pushed Ben Hecht onto my lap, this beautiful American scriptwriter and writer, and just generally journalist, also a very versatile writer of a particular generation that had been very influential for Lavey. And I just gradually learned to love Ben Hecht, and I still do. So that's no strange conundrum or anything. He mentioned Ben Hecht so many times and read from his books to me and stuff like that. So yeah, of course I got it. But I realized later on that maybe it was more to it than just presenting a friend with someone who they think that you should read. And when I talked to all these other people, first of all, friends from that era that had met Lavey at the same time, they all had that feeling also, that he was definitely presenting things in order to make an impression, not necessarily about him himself, but stuff that he wanted to pass along in a way, whether it be a piece of music or an attitude towards old pieces of music, or an old writer, or what he had written, what his entire life had amassed to, or a movie maker that was quirky or forgotten. And then the next step in the project was to talk to people that I didn't know at the time, but that I knew that they had known him at the time. And same thing there, basically everyone shared that notion. They shared that memory much later, that yes, something had been presented, and you could call it some kind of uh, programming between friends, or beneficial boosting or inspiration. You can call it by many names, but for me it made an impression, and for these other people also. And then when I had made the film, as you have so much material and you simply cannot fit it into a film, because it's just it'll be too long. So then I decided I'll just carry on and make this book, Anton Lavey and the Church of Satan. And I'm very happy with it, in the sense that there's more here in the book than in the film. The film has other advantages, of course, you can see the faces and some cool archival material. But in terms of the signal, what's actually being said, it's very great to have it in book form, I think, because it shows that kind of people are same but different. They have similar experiences, but they interpret it in a different way.
Do you think these little morsels he was putting out to you and the other people that he interacted with were part of a larger project that he was, or an intention that he was working on, perhaps?
I think so, but whether it was conscious or not, I cannot say. I think that at this time he was quite infirm. He was quite reclusive. He did have a social life, but it was basically revolving around the Black House. We could go out to dinner, but then we came back to the Black House and basically spent the time there. And I think that he had a legacy, of course. With his kids, he had a legacy with the books that he had written, all the interviews and all the media presence and these things. But I think perhaps towards the end of his life, that he wanted to secure other forms of legacies too, and that's basically. And also, I also want to mention that he was very, very generous. He was a very friendly and generous person. So maybe it was just in his nature. If he liked someone enough to have them come back several times to his house, and hang out, then of course the visitors would share things and Lavey would share things. And I always felt that he was very. There were really no, I don't know, secrets or taboo subjects or anything like that. We could talk about many things, and I did feel that he was. When I told him, for instance, that I liked old pens, fountain pens and stuff like that, then he immediately showed me his pens. He also liked them. He liked mechanical things and objects that are sort of well crafted, handicrafted beauty. Could be all cars or knives or guns, but pens and watches, things like that. So once you were in, you were shown a good time, basically. And I felt, of course, very inspired, because where I was at this time in my individuation process was, you could say, a budding writer, a budding editor, a budding publisher, and dealing with occultural topics with my newly started fanzine at the time, the Fenris Wolf. And he was very generous, and they let me use some of his writing for my little fanzine project, and it was just it meant a lot. So I think he wanted to secure some kind of perhaps unspoken legacy among this younger generation that were coming forward, and that he could see were what he called movers and shakers. We were people who were actually producing things and manifesting things, not just talking about it, or just sort of doers. And I think he felt safe then in sort of disseminating this, let's call it occult knowledge that he had. Right.
Well, if he was curating his legacy, he chose well to choose you, because you've done a wonderful job.
Yeah, because we're here talking about it right now. So yeah.
Well, tell me, and speaking about but before we get to the total environment and sort of his philosophy, I just was wondering if in the bigger picture, when I was going into reading this, I was thinking, how was he sort of personifying the archetype of the infernal, Lucifer, the Satan? And it seemed to be, it's like part of it was like, a Bela Lugosi costume in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And then, but you kind of pointed to sort of some other things that were going on behind the scenes, that how he was sort of embodying the archetype. Mm-hmm. Do you have a sense of what the archetype was like for him?
Yeah, I do. It's my sense, my interpretation, but I do feel it's accurate. And I think for one thing, we have to take into consideration that his take on things wasn't static, because you could easily divide the history so far of the Church of Satan in three, maybe four distinct phases. Then the first is the public decade between 66 and mid 70s, when he was very overt, very media savvy, media present, basking in the attention. And the second was slightly more reclusive in order to fully live according to the philosophy, meaning enjoy life and be enjoy pleasure, all these things, life enhancing stuff. And then the third part, which is sort of mid 80s up until he died in 97, which you could call reclusive. The Church of Satan was certainly active, but he himself was kind of reclusive and in failing health. And then if you want to have a fourth thing, that's post Lavey, the Church of Satan post Lavey, which is, thriving and active and very, web online oriented, and it just seems to be doing quite well. So in terms of his take on this archetype or this energy, I would say that also changed over time. We also have to go back a little bit to when he was formatted, because before the Church of Satan, before 1966, he also had this thing going on in the Black House called the Magic Circle. And that was basically evenings focused around the occult. Occult topics, Gothic topics. It could be anything from lectures about Lovecraft or werewolves or Western ceremonial magic and all kinds of things. And there was this group of friends and acquaintances who got together to discuss these things. And Lavey usually was the one who held the lecture. At this time, he was formulating and formatting himself to become someone that eventually manifested the Church of Satan, and thereby taking on the persona of the opposer, of the adversary, basically of Satan. And then you could say that, as I also, posed a question in the book, why would you do that if you didn't believe in any kind of anthropomorphic Satan, according to like Christian or monotheist notions? But of course, he was smarter than that. He basically chose it because he could see that there is a power in that which, what he called the herd, according to Nietzschean principles, what they shunned. If you are shunned, you are, of course, you're ostracized in a way, but you're also very powerful because you can sort of use the hate or aggression that's coming onto you and strengthen yourself by that. It's in adversarial circumstances, people can become quite strong, or in chaos or in warfare. You just have to survive and build up a certain kind of strength that will not come to you if you're completely harmonious and peaceful and at peace with life. So he knew that kind of energy. And I think that came from Nietzsche very much. He was a big Nietzsche reader, and also of Freud, and the way how, great psychological insight. And then, of course, he had a real interest in the occult. But as he says in the film, specifically some film clips there, and I think it's quoted in the book also, says that he tried all of these things according to the books about magic that existed at the time, but it was basically, gobbledygook that people had, reinterpreted from medieval times. And usually they came from a Christian source, with all these monsters and demons, and that were basically used as tricks to scare simple folk. Anyway, you could see that still being, possible in the US at the time, possibly even today, to scare people with this thing. Sure, it was kitschy. He had a cape on, plastic horns, and took on the role of Satan, having his Church of Satan, and it was sort of, in a way, very, very American in that sense. But sure enough, it did provoke a lot of attention, and that's exactly what he wanted. So he did not believe in any kind of satanic force as described by the Christians. He did believe in the adversary, the one who opposes the herd and points their finger accusingly at hypocrisy, meaning, for instance, Christian abuse of money and people and all these things. And then, of course, the other side, which was basically like, the hippies at the time, who were drug befuddled and completely, loose, they also did not like Lavey, because although he was part of San Francisco in the mid-60s, he advocated a free love that actually was a free love, in the sense that real experimentation with sexuality, for instance, in terms of getting to know yourself so that you become a stronger self, not necessarily losing yourself in Golden Gate Park to some stranger while high on acid. So I think that he was right there in between these two quite strong diametrical poles of the US at this time. Then later on, I think that he was seriously interested in occult lore, in what you call diabolical lore, meaning that there's a beauty in this kind of iconography of, demons and stuff from throughout the ages. Some of it is inherently kitschy because it's not really real. It's not like Blake, for instance. Blake is for real. Blake's visions are painted as he saw them. You can feel that. Whereas all the other, woodcuts and medieval frescoes of hell were, just demagogic images. Anyway, it's a rich material, and he loved that stuff. He loved the iconography of it. And when he grew up, he was also enamored by film noir, which is usually characterized by the anti-hero, again, a kind of satanic figure, someone who may be against the law, going against the law, but he has a heart of gold. And eventually he will be punished, but he will have set justice straight. He will have killed the real bad guy or something. So that kind of outsider perspective was with him all throughout life, and I don't think he ever wanted to shake it. He was there from early on in his life, and then what happened was that as he grew more and more recluse, I think that if you look at his writing from that time, it was mostly essays for the Cloven Hoof, the newsletter of the Church of Satan. They're great pieces. They're not at all, satanic flamboyant, like the Satanic Bible, which even that's the name of it, the Satanic Bible. And then comes the Satanic Rituals, the Satanic Witch, those were early works. But the later works, the essays, they're filled with, let's call it general magical thinking, general magical innovation that doesn't necessarily use Satan or the satanic or the demonic as a springboard to present things. It's more of I would call it more of a psychological grid or platform, something, or filter that he looked through. And I argue in the book, and I've done it many times, that he was the great magical innovator of the late 20th century. You could say that Crowley was one also, but Crowley was mainly a syncretist. He was a good collector and connector, whereas Lavey came up with these wonderful new concepts that really changed things in I wouldn't go so far as calling it the magical community, but certainly in some magical communities, he introduced new ideas that many people today work with, and successfully so.
Let's talk a little bit about some of those new concepts, if you have.
Mm-hmm.
Is one of them the total environment?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it seemed to me that the way you sort of described him as sort of identifying with the opposition and pointing out the flaws of the herd and not following the herd almost lends itself by natural energy to, the total environment, where you're sort of controlling your whole. I mean, maybe can you explain what the total environment is? And so
Absolutely, and I usually start in the small and expand into the big, meaning that most people cannot have a designated full room or a full house or a full, something big. But most people can set aside a little corner of a room and make that very special. And then you have this concept, basically altar building, or you make a sacred space for whatever you believe in. It could be, a Christian crucifix or a something else, doesn't matter. But I think that's an inherently human thing, a need to do that, to sort of build something. The total environment is based on the idea that, of course, what you have around you feeds back on you. It's not just you, interacting with the world also interacts with you. And as we all know, that can feel, detrimental in many parts. If you're not happy with your job or commuting, whatever, you feel drained when you come home. And that goes for here. That's another concept he came up with, the psychic vampire. People who are simply, they can't communicate straightly. They just negatively communicate between the lines and sort of draw things out of you or steal time or space or energy. That's the psychic vampire. But the antidote to all of that is, of course, to say no, but also to have your own total environment, which becomes like a replenishing sanctuary. And of course, it's so individual. You can't buy it prefab. You can't go to IKEA and buy a total environment. It needs to be, if not custom designed, then custom accumulated. Flea markets or antique shops. You are attracted to a certain thing. You have no idea why, but you just get that clock or that statue, whatever. And you put all of these things together and let it accumulate, and it will feed back to you in a very beneficial way, inspiring, energizing, all these kind. It could be something so simple as not settling for having white walls. You could have a dark, Gothic or even floral wallpaper, or just paint it black or paint it purple, paint it red, whatever you want. Just don't accept what's been given to you. And then, of course, it goes, a library is part of a total environment, arranging your books and, having books on your bookshelf that not only are taken out at sometimes to be read casually, but also as important talismanic objects that radiate from the shelves in a way. And it could be, personal objects that heirlooms, all kinds of meaningful objects within a confined space in a way. Someone who was very instrumental in developing this also was Kenneth Anger, who's also interviewed in the book and the film. And I met him on the same trip as the first trip to meet Lavey in 1989. And he was then living in Hollywood. And of course, he wrote the books, Hollywood Babylon 2, amazing books. And he had a great collection back then of Hollywood memorabilia, film stills, objects, posters, books, all kinds of things. And entering that, his home was, well, it was beyond, I was going to say like a museum, but that's the difference. You don't enter a museum, you enter a sacred space. You enter the space, in this case, where someone who was so enamored and lived in that mind frame of 1930s Hollywood, there was nothing else. There was only objects speaking that language, whether it was framed posters or framed photographs of movie stars, objects, PR material, Art Deco style in general. There was nothing modern there. And in the Black House, in Lavey's house, it was more eclectic because it was a house, so he could have different rooms with different styles. The kitchen was very eclectic. It did function as a kitchen, but it was also the place where he had his synthesizers, where he played his music. So that was very much I don't know, frolicking is a strange word, but that's where you had really good times and sort of listening to him music and laughing a lot, and he's very jolly. And then there was the purple parlor, which was painted purple with bookshelves. That's where you watched films, and there was a beautiful coffee table made from a tombstone and very eerie. And then there was the ritual chamber, which was really a ritual chamber. It's all black and had all the paraphernalia from the old Church of Satan heyday in a way, with many magical objects. Bram Stoker's ashes, a rocking chair that had belonged to, was it Rasputin? And then you could argue, was that really true? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It was a great story. And there were other rooms also, the Den of Iniquity. There was a bar that he had built in the basement with these sort of artificial human companions, as he called them, basically mannequins that he had designed or styled the way he wanted them, as being patrons of a bar, very sleazy, seedy bar, which evoked for him the time when he worked as a musician in bars like that. And there was a guest room that was like right out of a film noir, with one of these sort of brass beds and a shoulder holster on a chair, and a neon sign outside a fake window. It's just amazing. And he could go into these rooms and sort of be those people. You could sort of shift personalities or shift creative atmospheres, whatever he was after. He could just go into that room and fill up with that energy. So it's a very, very powerful thing. And you don't need a lot to be able to realize that it actually works well. So my recommendation is that people should just start with a little corner, get a tiny table, and build your own little altar based on things that are 100% resonating with you, and then see what happens and see how it unfolds.
Yeah, and I was sort of extrapolating this, and tell me if I'm not if mischaracterizing this idea of a total environment. I was putting that in juxtaposition to the Christ archetype, because the Christ archetype, if for me, is like permeable, letting everything in, not putting barriers or boundaries, not curating, not saying no, everything is yes. And then, but then the opposition to that is what you're saying, is where everything is carefully curated.
Yes.
I mean, am I looking at that the right way? Perhaps?
Yeah, I think so. I think so, absolutely. And we could go beyond. I see what you're saying, you know, with the Christ thing.
Lord, make me a channel of your peace. You know, you're a channel of the divine, as opposed to you saying the barriers.
Absolutely. I see where you're going. And also I would sort of expand upon that and take it to Asia also, with Zen Buddhism, with the Tao in China, things like that, where you just sort of laissez-faire in a way. You don't push things, you don't pull things either. You just accept things for what they are in a way. And I say that, you know, whatever floats the boat for people, and that's something Lavey would say also, that's what they should go for. But you're perfectly right in that this philosophy of Satanism and this philosophy of you know, the total environment, curation, you mentioned that word, it's a highly curated thing, because it's done and recommended in the belief from experience, Lavey's experience and many others, that human beings are they want to feel a sense of meaning, to have a purpose in life. That could also work vice versa. You know, you get a purpose in life by then you feel meaning. It's sort of interchangeable. And how do you do that? Well, it's hard if you're living in really dire circumstances, dire straits, to just accept everything and, you know, whatever passes through me. You know, people also have a sense of self-preservation. They will fight back if pushed hard enough, you know, and then that thing is simply gone, because on an instinctual level, everything we do is to survive. And then you can, you know, slightly below that or above that, you could add a pinch of civilization on top of that, and then say that, well, if we are animals and just want to strive to survive, at least we as humans have something else. We can curate. We can say yes or no to people and things, and hopefully, you know, that will add to our sense of survival, to our sense of feeling empowered enough to have agency to you know, be the master of your own fate in a way. So I think that Satanism is very much a philosophy of curating, of discriminating. Discernment, yeah. And yes, I was going to say discriminating, but not in the sort of derogatory or possibly, you know, condescending way. Just, you know, separating one thing from another because you like this thing more, whether it's, you know, meat or vegan, whether it's Coca-Cola or Pepsi. You know, there you could find a gazillion different things, and you should always go according to this philosophy for the thing that you like, not what other people like. And that again is like an encouragement to formulate, soul search, look in the, you know, mirror, existential mirror, be honest, and really don't settle for anything less than perfection. And that perfection can only be when you feel the most meaning. Otherwise, there will be, you know, so many other people who are more than willing, actually they're happy to go into that space in you and fill that with something, you know, whether it's commodified and commercial or religious or any kind of other kind of sort of zealot ism.
Sure, sure. Well, you want to switch to another one of his ideas, the ECI, erotic
Right.
crystallization inertia.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is. I told you he was very much into psychology, and he loved Freud. He also, Jung, and also Wilhelm Reich. Reich had all these theories about orgone energy,
Sure, sure, sure.
and he was, a remarkable figure. And Lavey was very, very interested in all these things, and also integrated many of these concepts in specifically the early rituals of the Church of Satan. But ECI as a concept has to do with, let's call it, an individuation process. We all know the importance of our first sexual experiences, whether it's by ourselves or together with other people. It could be nice, it could be not nice, it could be great, it could be bad. Whatever happens, and I'm not sort of meaning one particular time or incident. It's mostly like a formatting phase where you are crystallized, where you sort of are so affected by the feelings and the senses and the experiences you have that they will be with you for the rest of your life, for good or bad. And even bad things or sort of negative experiences can be turned into good things along the way when you are working with it. That, Freud would agree that, many of these issues could be resolved through psychoanalysis or other kinds of therapies, but you can never shy away from it. You can't repress it. That'll be the return of the repressed and truly demonic forces in your life. So ECI is basically referring to that early phase, those early moments where your sexuality is crystallized. It could be that you saw something when you were first aroused, or vice versa. It could be olfactory, it could be a smell that turns you on later on, or a dress style, or the lack of a dress style. Many, many things in space, in time, with the senses, with your own mind frame. And that will stick with you. And if you're insightful enough and aware of these things, you can work with this and enhance it even more. Or if it's something that bugs you, you can work with it to make it go away in a way, although it probably never really can. But it all depends on which attitude you have. And he wrote about this also in a very interesting way, about how important active sexuality is to a human being, and that also includes asexuality. Active asexuality, it may sound like an oxymoron, but that's actually a thing too. Is that when people grow older, sort of going into geriatric mode, both men and women usually are frozen in their clothing style. You don't see 80-year-olds going down to the fashion store and getting the latest fashion. And if they do, it's like looked upon with high weirdness. The thing is that they seem to get stuck in the time when they were most sexually active. And of course, in a senior citizen's home or the resting home, people you can see that, okay, this is that generation. They were young in the 60s, they dressed like this, or young in the 50s or even 40s, and that's where they got arrested in a way in their development. And who can argue those are the best years of our life in a way, when we're most sexually attractive, active, virile or seductive. Those are powerful forces. And I think Reich was the one to formulate it, as much as saying it's a very concrete energy called orgone, that is like a residue or a charge, and can also be a discharge of sexual functions. And for Lavey, it was just, I would say, part of the puzzle, part of the toolbox that was given to people who were smart enough under this dark satanic umbrella to work with themselves, to make it easy for people to realize things about themselves, and not necessarily having to sign some dotted line where you sell your soul to the devil or something ridiculous like that. But it's just like, here are these cool concepts, work with them. And for many people, they have certainly worked.
And maybe I'm reading a little bit too much into this, but I've had a sense in reading this that you had, growing up in Sweden and coming in contact with some of his earlier work and pictures, that it sort of contributed to your ECI, perhaps.
Yeah,
Mr.
yeah.
Lavey.
Well,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's what makes this so mysterious also, because I'm still here talking about it, right?
You're completing the circle.
Oh, yeah. And there have been so many weird things concerning that, specifically about, there's one chapter in the book, the last one, which is my introduction to another book called California Infernal. And when I grew up, there was, a lot of stuff in Swedish men's magazines about weird people, weird occultists, just weird artists. And Lavey was in there several times. I remember seeing those pictures. Specifically, they were from the 60s, the cool pictures with the naked ladies on the altar and all these things. And Lavey was, in his prime. And much later, a Swedish collector that I didn't know, but he offered me the use of some negatives and prints that he had bought from the estate of a German paparazzo, a photographer based in LA in the 60s. And he was the one who had actually taken all these insanely cool photos of Lavey and Jane Mansfield, and Lavey and Mansfield together because they had a little fling, and she was supposedly a member of the Church of Satan. And it's just incredible. So then I did that book, and that was actually the real instigation of the spark for this project. California Infernal came out in 2016, I think. And then I had no holds barred. I was just going, oh, I need to make this other book now too, saying that, it was a very important time for me, obviously, maybe even, as you say, on the ECI level, and certainly on an individuation level, and inspiration and everything. So it's just like these circles moving, hopefully, forward.
Well, and you even immortalized Lavey and Jane Mansfield in one of your songs, right?
That's right.
Was Sweet Jane.
That's right. Exactly. And that's really what set all of this in motion was my I don't know, prurient, pubescent fantasies about what the goings on in San Francisco at that time led to me writing sort of the lyrics to this out of tune rock and roll song. And then a friend of mine, Genesis Peorage, said when the record came out, I have Lavey's address, you should send it to him and see what he says. And I could have not done that, but I did do that. And then Lavey wrote that letter back to me saying, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Jen would too. And by the way, you're now a member of the Church of Satan. So it was that easy. And it goes to show the power of out of tune rock and roll songs.
Well, so maybe it's time for a quick musical intermission with one of your other songs. Maybe could we play "I'm in Love with a Witch" and maybe give a little backstory of that before we play?
Yeah, absolutely. It's I make music in. Not consistently, but there come phases in my life when I feel to take a break from the mental intellectual things, and it's balm for my soul to make music. It's just drifting into a completely different mind frame and sensual state. So that track was from an album that I think came out in 2017 or something, and I'm in Love with a Witch. And the witch, of course, is my wife, Vanessa, and it's just like a love song for her.
Well, let's listen to the love song, "I'm in Love with a Witch." I just wanted to leave some dead air so I could find it on the edit.
Of course. We're professionals. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I'd like since maybe if we have time, can we cover one more of Lavey's concepts?
Of course.
I'm kind of interested in the balance factor. And maybe if you could unpack that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. The balance factor was presented already in the Satanic Bible, and it's one of the prerequisites for success in magic or magical success. In the sense that, again, it just goes to show how important psychology was for Lavey when he was constructing these things. Because although the packaging is, magical, occult in a way, satanic, there's a lot of, common sense in there, down to earth insights about how humans function psychologically. And the balance factor is that you have to know who you are, what you present, what you represent to the world, before you can even think that you can change things in the world in your favor. That sounds like common sense, right? But in this magical world, when it's basically here's a book, do some rituals, be successful. I don't know, maybe that's a typical sort of American mind frame, 10 easy steps, success,
Right.
This kind of focus. It's not so esoteric as a lot of the European stuff has been, usually more technical, but still obfuscating in a way. But it's not that simple. You can't simply causally affect the world by your will. You need either negative implements like weapons saying do this or I'll kill you, or you can try your hand at magic and see what happens as a kind of an experimental technology in a way. However, things become much, much easier if you are completely honest with yourself. You're aware of how you talk, what you look like, how you usually interact with other people. Are you socially impaired? All these things, self-knowledge basically. And that was, from the oracle at Delphi, know thyself. It has been there all through esoteric history, that you have to have this knowledge before you even attempt to manipulate the let's call it the cosmic forces or the magical forces, because otherwise it would it will be like just pressing the gas, pressing the pedal in a car without touching the wheel. You can go, but you can't really guide the way the vehicle is moving. There might be a wall in the way, or it might be a highway. And the thing is, he brought out some examples in the Satanic Bible. That's like, if you want to basically if you want to attract the most the sexiest ladies or whatever it is, you cannot simply be a couch potato with hubris. You either you have to attract by the things that these ladies will be impressed by. It could be great looks, or power in some way. It could be as simple as money, or any other kind of power. Then you can open the door in a way for a communication that might lead to whatever it is that you want. And the same thing goes in all the directions. If you only speak English, and you come into a room where you want to talk to people, but they all speak French, it's going to be hard. Because there will be no avenue for communication. So you have to see what it is that you can bring to the table, if there's something on that table that you want to take away.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, just simply the balance factor. You have to be in balance with whatever it is that you want to achieve.
And you noticed, and you mentioned in passing this before about artificial human companions, and that's something I think you point in the book, that many of Lavey's ideas, the trajectory is, some of them are very much more in play now than during his time, perhaps. How do you see that? Do you see him as being somewhat prescient of how humanity has been evolving?
Yeah, I think so.
And otherwise.
I think so. And I think you can ascribe that not necessarily to, being involved in rituals or things like that. Could be. But I think, real artists, I mean, that's a very tricky term. I know that, to say that someone, a real artist. But let's just say that artists who tend to produce really interesting material that lasts, they're usually open-minded in a way. Seems to be like they are receptive to what's going on, and they can formulate that so much that what they formulate and produce actually pushes the direction in that pushes the whatever current there is in that direction that they have perceived. It's like they are midwives in a way to things. It's
like the balance factor in a way.
Yeah, and they sort of midwives to the zeitgeist. There are things up here going on, culture, ideas bouncing back and forth, and some people just sort of drag down little concepts, present them, make something out of it, and toss it back. I guess maybe the most common thing is like for writers and philosophers, but it's certainly also artists and filmmakers, and that become defining of that specific time and that specific culture. And he was very much an artist, and I think what he opened up at this time was very much individual freedom. Crowley had done that before him, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, and his, law of Thelema. And the hippies were doing their thing with the age of Aquarius, free love, be free, all of that. But for Lavey, he was very much in the middle, and he always said also responsibility should lie with the responsible, meaning you cannot just be like a free agent rushing down the highway in the opposing direction. Then you will be smashed by the traffic that will face you. You have to be in tune, smart, the balance factor again, and you also have to be responsible for whatever it is that you're doing. You can't sort of make some experimental move that might be illegal or dangerous or endangering other people, and then say, I'm so sorry, I didn't know, the devil made me do it, whatever. You should be strong enough to be responsible for your actions, and that was a key thing in his sort of construction of an individuation package, which made it kind of rare, because in those days, and now still, there are always other groups who are willing to sell you that individuation package. So he just wanted people to be truly free in a way. And I would say perhaps more realistically so than Crowley. Crowley was still a little bit perhaps ahead of his time, but also there's a limit, because when you logically sort of extract these things from these philosophies of will, then you come up with individuals who are usually kind of, you don't want to be in the same room as they are, because they're just so egotistical in a way. But Lavey had, again, the balance factor, and this thing it's a push and pull situation. It's also an economy. He mentioned that also in his when he talks about sort of youthful experiments with demons, this back and forth, and he said something like, you want to be on their side, and to be on someone's side, you have to have, again, some kind of communication and resonance, and it's not just you with your magical wand saying, I want this and I want that, and those people, whether they're magicians or not, they become, you just can't be with them. It's like artists or actors who sort of suck all the energy or all the air, because they want all the attention all the time.
Sure. Did he have any relationship with psychedelics?
No. That I can blatantly and sort of consequently say no. He was very much against that, although he said that basically to each his own. But again, responsibility. Don't be befuddled. He always liked to drink, but not to become smashed or lose that control. Because I think for him, whatever the indulgence was, he wanted to be present enough to enjoy the indulgence. I mean, be aware of the indulgence, be aware of the pleasure. And of course, I think he might have looked at it differently had not the area around him been so crazily, explosively colorful in that way.
Sure. Sure.
There were no real, I don't think there were that many Nietzschean psychedelicists at the time. It was just more like free explosion.
I don't even know if there are any now.
No, exactly. So I think in general, he was very negative towards that. But then again, he would have been positive towards anything that gave you a deeper insight about yourself. Sure. So he was not like prejudiced in that sense. It was again, whatever floats the boat. But I think he was shocked by what he saw around him. That was as far from what he wanted to achieve as it simply, there was no match there.
Yeah, and I listened to some of your your lectures online at your website, and
Mhm.
you were talking about the anima mundi and
Yeah.
things like that. And I just had a sense that your sort of relationship in what we were talking about, your total environment, your curated
Mhm.
environment would have been much different than LaVey's. And maybe I'm just looking at his later years as him being more reclusive, but I just
Mhm.
think that you're just, well, tell me if I'm wrong, that you would be much more, when we were talking about the different archetypes, about the Christ archetype of, connecting with the world and letting things in versus curating. I mean, I just get the sense that, and this is just my own, I'm more on that side too, or at least
Mhm.
at least, um, so, this thing about boundaries and everything. I'm just curious what's your sense of what your total environment would be different than LaVey's, perhaps.
Yeah, I think so. I have certainly been into the same culture as he was, in the sense that I like a lot of the same, the kind of old Hollywood movies, horror movies, film noir, the kind of old music. I've always been someone who, at least I feel that way. I've gone against the grain. So if the everything has been, clothed in pastel colors and very surface oriented, I have gone deeper and into the black in a way. Now I feel that I salute all of that, all of my previous aesthetic indulgences and music. I can still enjoy many of those things that was really part and parcel of this satanic environment for me. They're very dear to my heart. But I think that I've also always been interested in things magical, beyond these parameters, and that's why I eventually, I can't remember when it began, but I've always called myself, at least for a long time, a magical anthropologist. I'm very interested in magic and how it relates to human beings and human culture, human development, and vice versa. So in that sense, I see myself as, I guess you could call it, in the olden days, it was called a private scholar. I have my own, Institute of Comparative Magical Anthropology.
Mhm.
It's basically me building an archive, and I'm publishing this journal, this book called The Fenris Wolf, semi-regularly, and it's very eclectic, open-minded, where I, invite people to write about many different things from many different traditions, including the satanic one, and basically things having to do with these topics that I'm interested in. So my total environment actually is very much like the environment I am in now and have been for about a year, when me and my wife, we actually moved from Stockholm to a very small town, and we have a fairly big house, and it's not rural, but it's very uh, the house is kind of rural and it's in a small town. So it's very, very different from this confined, dense urban environment of fast paced, almost, I don't know, academic intensity in a way. And now it's more relaxed and we can take our time when thinking about these things and writing or editing and publishing about these things. So I think I'm more of, it's hard with these things. A country squire, it was called back in England, or a private scholar, or someone who's interested in, like my wife and I, we have conferences going on and online lectures and things under the umbrella that's called psychoanalysis, art, and the occult, and that sort of encompasses a lot of these things that we are interested in, and so I would see that my total environment, and probably hers also, is very like what you see behind me. Now we're in the library, and then we can sit in the garden and talk about these things also. It's like Cicero said that all you need is a garden and a library, something like that. And now we have that. So I think both those are my optimal total environments: a very nice library and a very nice garden.
So does I wanted to ask you if the Eagles song "Hotel California"
Yeah.
has any reference to LaVey. I mean, is that it didn't you didn't really cover that in the book, but I was just curious.
Yeah, it's a topic of mythic proportions.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
And I always play safe, so I say I believe in everything. And I think that I believe that they were, because he was very he was flirting. He was flirty towards certain environments, and one of these environments was Hollywood. And I mean that specifically in the late 60s, early 70s, there were a lot of celebrities that met him. And if he liked you, he would, hand you a membership card to the Church of Satan, and thereby became part of a myth saying that, oh yeah, those and those guys were members of the Church of Satan. Yeah, but maybe it wasn't of their own design. Maybe it was
Exactly.
him handing them a membership card. So, and this is thing about, Hotel California, because the Black House, where everything was centered, was on California Street in San Francisco. And when you listen to the lyrics, it's certainly, I don't know, you can find a lot in there that is not so far-fetched. You can find a lot of things textually in there that would imply, like one of his nicknames, for instance, was the Captain. And they reference the Captain, please bring me my wine. We haven't had that spirit here since 1969, which was like the peak era, Church of Satan, etc., etc. You can check out anytime you want, but you can never leave. Things like that. Yeah, so I believe in it. Also, you have to in a way give the devil his due. That song has been so insanely successful. And funnily enough, always, I haven't been there in a while, but always when I was in San Francisco after his death, whenever we were driving past the house, it was always that song on the radio, And of course, that's a smash hit for decades. So of course it's going to be played. But for me, it was like eerily synchronistic. It was always around when I was close to the house. So yeah, I believe in it.
There you go.
Yeah.
Straight from the scholar's mouth, or the country squire's house.
Yes, exactly.
Well, how should, if people are interested in connecting with you, what would be the best way to do that? I've been to your website. My goodness, you have so many different projects going on there. It's you can keep somebody pathological. You could never leave.
No, exactly.
You could check out every time you want, but you can never leave.
And neither do I want to leave. But basically, they should go to my website. So it's just carlabrahamson.com. Carl with a C, Carl Abrahamson with 2 S's.com. And that will give people a lot of information. It will also take them to all the other social media platforms.
Wonderful. So in our end here, should we leave it with the Mushrooms of Eurasia, one of your songs?
I think that sounds great. What a great way to end the show.
Okay, well, I was going to say inside you is outside me. I kind of like that one too, but
yeah,
we can stick with the shamanism, and that's where I think that you're I would think your total environment would be different than his, because I sense that you're much more interested in that topic than perhaps Lavey would have ever been, perhaps.
Yeah, but let's not forget one thing, which is very interesting. He was very good friends with Michael Harner, and the anthropologist who wrote The Way of the Shaman. They were friends, and Harner was, of course, a guy who, I wouldn't say reintroduced, but he certainly made the topic very, very interesting to the mainstream. Whereas, shamanistic studies and stuff had been very, ethnically specialized, only going for tiny tribes and indigenous people and extinct occurrences, things like that. But Harner certainly brought it out into the limelight again, into the mainstream. And they were friends. Also, another friend was like, his name, Jacques Vallée, the UFO researcher. Yeah,
sure.
There are beautiful photos of them together at the Black House. So he was very active in his networking all along.
Wow, that's quite a thing. Well, then,
so what I wanted to say with that was that he was certainly not unaware of what shamanism is, what a shaman does, but whether or not he identified with it, I think not. He was too earthy. He was connected to the earth and sensual pleasures, and that was his magic.
Sure. Well, let's leave it with the Mushrooms of Eurasia then.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks.
Are you allowed to say which? Do you say what little small town in Sweden you're residing in now?
Yeah. It's called Vimmerby.
Could you spell it for me? I'll never be able to say that.
Vimmerby. Vimmerby.
Oh, Vimmerby.
Yeah, Vimmerby.
Wow.
Mhm.
Love it. Well, my significant other is actually from Sweden as well,
All
and
right.
she was going back there at the end of the month, so that
All
should
right.
be
Where is she from?
uh, another small town that I I can't.
Right.
I've
Right.
not been there. I have not visited Sweden yet. That's on my to-do list. As soon
Right. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
as I
Yeah.
have a
You
little
should.
bit of,
You should.
yeah,
Yeah,
I would
we're
love
in
to
a
go.
very, very peculiar place here because we're in the hometown of one of Sweden's most prominent authors, Astrid Lindgren, the woman who wrote about Pippi Longstocking and these
Oh,
children's stories, massively successful. I think she's definitely the most successful writer ever in Sweden, and this was her hometown. So there's even like a theme park here, and everything is focused on her stories. So it's a very
right.
literary and fun place.
All right. Wonderful. Well, thanks for this. And I guess maybe Vanessa, will you be able to like Dropbox the sound
Yeah,
file then probably, or
we use
or
we transfer. We'll send you.
that's fine. Oh, well,
We
you sent
transfer.
me, you used that before
Yeah,
for your
exactly.
music. So
Yeah.
yeah, so great. Well, thanks, Carl. And it's a wonderful book. And we should have talked about Lux Interior
Oh, in
on
what
the,
sense?
because I saw him on
Right.
one of your books. I actually that's where our music might intersect, because I'm actually I think a year older than you, but I've seen
Yeah.
him in concert a number of times back
Yeah.
when he
Yeah.
was still in this realm,
Yeah.
so to
No, I
speak.
mean, amazing stuff.
Yeah.
I've also made a photo book called Fanzinera Expanded. You'll find that on my site, and that's because at that time, basically 85 to 88, I used to have a music fanzine, and I interviewed Lux and Ivy when they played in Stockholm, and it was so wonderful. I love them. I really love them, and it was
Yeah.
so funny also that, of course, when they played in Stockholm, I had I was in the front row and I'd smuggled in my little camera so I could get good snapshots, and I certainly did. And there was also this thing where someone gave him, because he was, really um, pulling his shenanigans in the front row, just really in our faces. And
Right.
someone
Right.
handed him a cigarette, and he sort of tossed it up in the air, and he was gonna catch it with his mouth or something, but failed. So I grabbed it like in the air, and then he sort of bit my finger, and he wouldn't let go. And all the people they were just laughing, and he was like, trying to sing at the same time. And then, eventually he let go, and I was, of course, very honored. But my finger got swollen, and it wouldn't go down after.
Did you have to get a rabies shot?
Well, I was thinking about that. I was thinking maybe I should have. Maybe I was infected with something. But it was really, I felt it was so cool at the time that I didn't want to sort of take away. But I still actually have a little scar from Lux Interior's tooth on my finger. Yeah.
You're probably, that's a mark of distinction, literally and
Yeah, I
figuratively,
would
in
say
every
so.
sense of the
And
word.
to tell you what, to show you what kind of a nerd I am, I still have that cigarette too.
All right.
Yeah. In some kind of plastic folder.
Well, yeah, it's a big
That's a
family.
real fanzine editor.
Did he strip in Sweden like he did in the United States
Yeah, yeah,
on
yeah.
stage?
But he had these trousers that were just so low cut. So he wasn't fully nude, but he was like, these spandex trousers that were so low cut.
Oh, yeah. I just wondered. He actually he went all out. I'm surprised he didn't get arrested a couple
Yeah,
of times. I saw
yeah.
public indecency laws and such.
Yeah, yeah. No, but
Yeah.
an amazing artist. And I've always liked their music a lot, but mainly their attitude. They were, they're a typical example of someone that Lavey would have defined as completely satanic, because they were so, indulgent in whatever they did, and they lived in their own world. Talk about the total environment, like, pictures from their home. It's like all these movie posters and rock and roll memorabilia. And,
Yeah.
it's like a really like their own museum in a way. So
Yeah.
again, you mentioned that word curating is very to the point. You curate your space.
Yeah, that makes so much sense because there's something about that. I have a friend in college who was in a band in Chicago in the 80s and 90s, and he's the same way. I mean, his environment was very curated, and he had just, he had his, he was a big Cramps fan, but he would have, his where he lived was always just very, the same theme, and there's something about that sort of culture, and maybe because I never fit into that. I'm a Slav, and I don't, I don't, I don't pay attention to sort of my reality. I just have a tough time. I will bump into things because I just don't see things. But some people, it's all very organized and curated, and they like to put everything in its place and everything. They're familiar. So there was something about, he's the same way, and the people that were in other bands in the Chicago music scene were the same way. They were all into, the kitschy this or that, and then they would keep the cigarettes from Lux Interior.
There you go.
Yeah, wonderful, interesting. I'll have to think about that. That's interesting. Maybe if it was just that. Because people, do you find people doing that as much these days? Like I've got 21-year-old twin daughters, and I don't get a sense that they have that sort of, I don't know, maybe it's just them, but I don't see people of their generation doing that, perhaps.
No, I think that the problem is that they are too passive. They are bombarded with information in a way that we weren't. We had to seek out information. And I think that helped a lot, because then you could discern. Then you could be, discriminating, saying, whoa, no thanks, or yeah, this is wonderful.
Right.
But the kids, I also have, my daughter is 23, and, it's like she lives in just a flow of information. And it's really nothing that she actively seeks out. She's just there as like the recipient of commercial interests or interests groups, or I don't know. I find it quite depressing, especially since I have such, nostalgic memories of being this sort of cultural detective when I was young. It was such great joy in finding these things and connecting the dots, whether it was in music or literature or movies but it's just too easy now that no one really bothers.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of looking at that. I hadn't thought of it that way. Well, thanks, Carl. Enjoy your evening. Hope I didn't keep you up too late.
No, don't worry. And I'll just I'll bring in my wife for safety's sake, and then we'll end this recording, and then we'll send it to you via WeTransfer.
Yeah, and I'll try to get it up next week. Oh, do you have any preference on a bio, or should I just use something from your website, or
Yeah, just use whatever you want in terms of pictures or descriptions, or I would love if you could have the link to the website there also.
Oh, yeah. Sure, absolutely.
And possibly in my email signatures, if you could take like the main website, and then maybe the Patreon address would be great also. It's there in my signature.
You have 20 links. Yeah, exactly.
You don't need to do all of those.
Okay.
Yeah,
thanks a bunch.
The website and the Patreon one would be great.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
Thanks, Carl.
Thank you. And let me know as soon as it's up, and I'll PR it as much as I can.
Great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye. Tootsie?